Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Vanessa served dinner as if it were just another ordinary night. The table was set, simple, without decorations, just 2 plates, utensils, and glasses of water. Adam was calm, chewing slowly, with a distant gaze, not imagining what was about to happen. Or perhaps he already knew, because nothing on his face showed surprise or anxiety. She, on the other hand, seemed to be carrying something inside her, something on the verge of exploding. She held the fork with some stiffness, her fingers slightly tense. For a moment, only the sound of the utensils cutting the food filled the room. Vanessa didn't touch her plate, she just moved the food around as if that would delay the inevitable. Suddenly, she dropped the utensil onto the plate, not caring about the dull noise it made. Her gaze was determined, cold, without a trace of regret. Her voice came out firm, without trembling, as if reciting something rehearsed many times in her mind. "I want a divorce." The words echoed like a blade cutting through the silence of the house. She kept her eyes fixed on Adam, expecting to see him crumble, expecting to see his face contort in pain, expecting tears, pleas, maybe even screams. But Adam simply raised his gaze, with a calmness that bordered on uncomfortable. Not a single eyebrow lifted, not a single muscle in his face moved. His eyes were fixed on her, as if seeing her for the first time, as if in that moment he finally understood who she really was. Vanessa shifted in her chair, surprised by his cold reaction. Inside, she braced herself for a conflict, for an emotional spectacle, but all she received was silence. A silence that hurt more than any words. Adam continued staring at her for a few seconds, in one of those moments where time seems to stretch. Then, with the same calmness with which he had been eating dinner minutes earlier, he responded. "I already imagined this moment would come." The coldness of the phrase made him seem even more unreachable. It was as if he had been waiting for it, as if he knew that every gesture of hers, every word spoken in recent times, all inevitably led to this outcome. Adam adjusted the napkin next to his plate, without looking away from her, and added, with the same low and firm voice. "Good thing we signed the prenuptial agreement." Vanessa felt the ground slip away for a second. She had forgotten that detail. Suddenly, the scenario she had so carefully planned began to lose its luster. Her face changed. The eyes that had been firm now showed the first sign of unease. Her hands, previously steady, began fidgeting with the glass with some urgency, as if seeking a point of support. She forced her breathing and tried not to show the impact, but it was impossible to ignore what she had just heard. In her mind, the memory was immediate, like a punch to the chest. She recalled the day when, amid laughter and promises, she signed that agreement. At the time, everything seemed so distant, so unlikely. She believed, with all the naivety of someone who confuses passion with certainty, that marriage was forever, that papers and contracts were just formalities without value, a whim to please lawyers or cautious family members. Little did she know how much that signature, made with such carelessness, would decide her fate now. Adam, however, had always been careful. He didn't say everything he thought, but every decision he made was meticulous, calculated, thought out to the smallest detail. And now she realized how much she had underestimated that. She forced a bitter smile, trying to hide the growing nervousness in her chest, and said, "You think this will protect you from everything?" Adam didn't respond. He simply got up from the chair calmly, picked up his plate, took it to the sink, and returned to the table with the same serene expression of someone who already had control of the situation. He looked at her one last time and said, "I'm just getting started." The words were spoken with such confidence that Vanessa, even without understanding what he meant by that, felt a chill. With each passing second, she realized the game was far from being in her favor. During that simple dinner, without witnesses, she believed she was taking the first step toward a new life, where she would emerge victorious, taking with her not only freedom but also material gains. But without realizing it, she had just opened the door to an abyss she hadn't imagined. While Adam cleared the rest of the table, with calm movements, Vanessa found herself, for the first time in a long while, completely speechless, with the clear feeling that she had made the biggest mistake of her life. Dinner had ended, but the atmosphere remained heavy. Vanessa remained seated, with a lost gaze, trying to process what she had heard. Adam, with his usual calmness, cleared the dishes and took everything to the sink. He didn't say another word. He simply acted as if it were any other night. She watched him with a mix of disbelief and anger. Her mind, until then secure and confident, began to create scenarios, all revolving around the same fear, the prenuptial agreement. It was as if that memory, which she had always considered irrelevant, was now a ghost haunting every thought. Vanessa knew she needed to react. And that's what she did. She raised her voice, trying to provoke some reaction from him. Her words were loaded with sarcasm, attempts at provocation, as if she still believed she could make him lose control. "You think everything is resolved with this ridiculous piece of paper? That a contract will protect you from me?" Adam didn't even change his expression. He simply dried a plate, listening to every word she said as if they were distant noises. When he finished, he placed the towel on the counter and returned to the table, approaching without haste. He looked directly into her eyes and, in a serene tone, almost cutting, responded. "I've already sent all the documentation to my lawyer." Vanessa felt her breathing grow heavier. That sentence seemed simple, but it carried an absurd amount of weight. She knew who his lawyer was. Diane Mitchell. The name sounded like a sentence. Known for her coldness and skill in handling complex cases, Diane was unbeatable when it came to contracts and division of assets. Even trying to hide her desperation, Vanessa clenched her hands tightly in her lap. Her voice faltered slightly as she responded, but she insisted on maintaining an air of superiority. "You're really willing to go through with this?" Adam just smiled, a discreet smile, almost imperceptible. There was an air of certainty in every movement of his, as if he already saw the outcome before she could even imagine it. He opened the drawer of the table and pulled out a copy of the prenuptial agreement, placing the document in front of her gently, without rushing, as if offering coffee after dinner. Vanessa looked at the paper as if it were an old enemy. The printed letters seemed to scream. Every clause, every signature, everything was there, clear, definitive, unchangeable. She flipped through the document with trembling hands, rereading sections she had never taken seriously. The complete separation of assets was described with an almost cruel clarity. No loopholes, no chance of contestation. Inside, she cursed herself for having been so naive. She remembered the laughter, the carefree words when she signed it. She thought she was too clever to worry about contracts, believing that love would solve everything. Now, faced with that paper, she felt cornered, as if she had dug her own trap. She tried to argue, but her words no longer carried the same strength. With each sentence, Adam simply listened, without interrupting, without retorting, like someone who knew time was on his side. Vanessa, in a final effort, tried to turn the tables. She made veiled threats, mentioned his company, insinuations about trying to harm him in other ways, as if she still had hidden cards. Adam didn't show any reaction. His gaze remained calm, cold, distant, like someone who has seen too much to be surprised by anything. She stood up, agitated, throwing sharp words across the room, hoping he would be shaken. Adam, however, remained seated, just observing, letting her wear herself out alone. When silence returned to dominate the environment, Adam spoke again, this time in a lower tone, but firm as steel. "What's done is done. You can kick and scream all you want. The contract is here. And my lawyer already knows how to deal with you." Vanessa felt her face burn. For the first time, she realized she was losing. Her pride, so inflated until then, began to crumble in the face of the reality surrounding her. Adam stood up, put the contract back in the drawer, and, before leaving the room, threw one last sentence, without looking back. "This is just the beginning. That sentence echoed in her mind, like an inevitable sentence. In her attempt to win, Vanessa had initiated a game she could never control. And now, every misstep she had made in the past came back to haunt her with full force. After that night, the silence between them became an abyss. Vanessa remained in the house, moving through the rooms as if she still had some control over that space, but every time she crossed paths with Adam, the tension increased. He, however, acted as if she weren't even there. He didn't argue, didn't question, didn't even look directly at her. He simply went about his routine, with a calmness that made her feel even more unstable. The next morning, Adam left early, without saying where he was going. He took only a small suitcase, enough clothes for a few days, and documents. Vanessa saw him leave through the window, her heart racing, but she remained still, trying to convince herself it was just a bluff. She imagined he would return, that this was just theater to scare her. But he didn't return that night. Nor the nights that followed. Adam temporarily stayed in an apartment he owned in his name, a discreet property close to his company, away from prying eyes and with total privacy. Meanwhile, his lawyer, Diane Mitchell, proceeded with the legal procedures relentlessly. Vanessa, out of pride and stubbornness, refused to leave the house. She believed staying there was a way of showing strength, as if it gave her some advantage. She spent days consulting other lawyers, searching for loopholes, trying to find some part of the contract she could use to her benefit. Each meeting ended the same way, with serious faces and direct responses, stating that the agreement was too solid to be contested. Time passed, and each of her attempts proved useless. The days began to weigh on her, and the house, which had once been her refuge, began to feel like a suffocating prison. She felt the weight of isolation, surrounded by memories and the awareness that she was increasingly cornered. Meanwhile, Adam remained silent, acting behind the scenes with precision. He avoided any direct contact, letting everything be resolved through lawyers. His stance was so firm that even Vanessa's legal representatives began to recognize that fighting against this process was like running against a tide that only grew stronger. Days turned into weeks, until the date of the hearing was set. Vanessa received the notification with a chill down her spine. It was as if that paper, delivered bureaucratically, carried the announcement that the end had arrived. On the eve of the hearing, she barely slept. She paced through the house, lost in thought, unable to define what she felt. Fear, anger, wounded pride, everything mixed together, making each hour a torment. Still, she maintained the mask of security on her face, as if it were possible to sustain the image of control until the last moment. Then, finally, the day of the hearing arrived. Vanessa carefully chose every piece of clothing, crafting an image that conveyed confidence and power. She wanted everyone to see her as someone unshakable, someone who would never bow to circumstances. But as she crossed the doors of the courtroom, it was as if every step echoed the reality she had so desperately avoided facing. Adam was there, with a calm demeanor and the same composed expression he had maintained from the start. His presence, so serene, was a reminder of everything she had lost along the way. The process began, and Vanessa took control as if she were on the main stage. Each sentence she spoke came out in the right tone, calculated, shaped to move others. She spoke firmly, talking about her years of dedication, the sacrifices she made for the marriage, how much she deserved to leave with fair compensation. Her gestures were smooth but strategically rehearsed. She looked at the judge at the right moments, sighed when convenient, as if truly carrying a burden that now deserved relief. For a few moments, she believed she was winning. The way the judge listened in silence seemed to give her an advantage. She felt in control of the room. But when she finished speaking, the silence that followed was different, dense, almost suffocating. Adam remained quiet throughout, without interrupting, without averting his gaze. And then, with a calmness that bordered on unsettling, he opened the briefcase by his side and, with the same composure with which he had endured every word she said, handed a dossier to the judge. He didn't say a word. No explanation, no comment. He simply handed over the document, as if presenting an undeniable fact. The judge took the material and, upon opening the first pages, his expression changed. He frowned, leaned forward slightly, and began analyzing every detail with absolute attention. Vanessa, confused, tried to peek, but all she saw were papers and photos being handled. She widened her eyes, her heart raced, and a chill ran down her spine. Something was wrong here. The judge, with a firm and direct voice, interrupted the sharp silence in the room and stared at Vanessa with a heavy gaze that seemed to pierce through any mask. Without beating around the bush, he asked in front of everyone, in a tone that left no room for escape. "Mrs. Vanessa, do you confirm that you had an extramarital affair with your boss, Marcus Caldwell?" The question hit her like a bomb. Vanessa was stunned, completely unprepared for this. Her face turned pale instantly, and her hands, previously steady on the table, began to tremble. She tried to disguise it, but her body was already betraying her. Her wide eyes, her slightly trembling chin, the sweat beginning to drip down her neck, everything about her revealed the panic taking over. The judge, with an increasingly serious face, began reading selected excerpts aloud. Explicit text messages, exchanges of intimate words, blatant confessions between her and Marcus Caldwell. The words echoed through the room like hammer blows. Vanessa froze. Her eyes widened, and her entire body seemed to freeze. The hands that had gestured with such confidence now visibly trembled. She felt her face heat up and, at the same time, go cold. Her heart beat erratically, as if it might explode. The judge, relentless, continued presenting the evidence. The images appeared, one after another. Clear, sharp photographs, impossible to contest. There she was with Marcus, in secret meetings, exchanging caresses, smiles, kisses. Moments she believed were well hidden were now exposed, cold, uncensored. She brought her hand to her mouth, trying to hold back a scream that threatened to escape. The world seemed to collapse in front of her. A mixture of shock, despair, and shame overwhelmed her body. She looked at Adam, terrified, and saw him sitting calmly, without a trace of emotion on his face, simply observing, as if all of this were part of a meticulously planned strategy. It was at that moment that Vanessa realized, with a lump in her throat, the cruelest truth of all: he had always known. All that time when he remained silent, indifferent, it wasn't carelessness. It was calculation. It was strategy. She murmured, almost without voice, overcome by absolute dread. My God, he knew, the whole time. Her face turned pale, her lips lost their color, and she had to hold on to the table to keep from fainting. The confidence that had once overflowed in every word evaporated. The woman who had entered confidently, believing she would leave victorious, was now unrecognizable, reduced to someone exposed, fragile, publicly defeated. The judge, unfazed, concluded the reading, and his voice filled the room with unwavering firmness. He declared that the prenuptial agreement would be fully enforced, with no room for contestation. In light of the proven adultery, Vanessa would not be entitled to alimony or any other form of financial compensation. He made a point of detailing each point, with surgical precision, emphasizing that all properties mentioned in the case, the main house, where the couple had lived for years, the beach house, and the countryside house, were assets acquired exclusively by Adam before the marriage, and that, according to an express clause in the contract signed by both, would remain solely in his possession. Moreover, the judge added that Adam's company, along with all profits, investments, and assets tied to the business, remain protected under his name, without any interference or rights on Vanessa's part. Finally, as a last blow, the judge set a deadline of 30 days for Vanessa to permanently vacate the main house, making it clear that from that date onward, she would have no further connection to any of the assets or properties. She would need to vacate the property and hand over the keys, with no possibility of appeal. Each word spoken felt like a brick falling on her, sealing her fate in a way she never thought she'd face. She sat there, dazed, unable to move. The courtroom seemed to spin around her, and the judge's final words rang out like a definitive sentence that would echo through the rest of her life. Adam, without rushing, gathered his documents and stood up, maintaining the same calm demeanor. He didn't look at her, didn't say a word. He simply left, leaving behind a room where Vanessa remained paralyzed, staring into the void, with the weight of her own destruction etched into every feature of her face. The courtroom had emptied, but the sentence echoed like a ghost in Vanessa's ears. She left that room carrying the weight of humiliation and the emptiness of someone who had lost everything, including the little dignity she still thought she possessed. Her face, once perfectly made up to impress, was now marked by sweat, nervousness, and a pallor that seemed endless. Her eyes remained wide open, as if still struggling to believe what had just happened. On the other side, Adam walked outside with the same serenity he had maintained from the start. There was no rush in his movements, not even a hint of satisfaction in his smile. His face remained neutral, like someone who had simply completed what was inevitable. He had waited for this moment for a long time, and every step along the way had been coldly calculated, executed with precision. Vanessa spent the following night awake, tossing and turning in thought, recalling every detail, every mistake, every decision that led her to this point. The idea that she would have to leave the house where she had lived for years tormented her. The deadline given by the judge was non-negotiable, 30 days to empty everything and disappear from Adam's life. The humiliation grew even more intense as the days passed. The looks from the people around her were no longer the same. Friends, neighbors, and acquaintances avoided commenting, but everyone knew. She could feel the judgment in the air, the whispered conversations as she passed by. While she dealt with public disgrace, Adam stayed focused. Without fanfare, he organized the remaining documents and completed all the bureaucratic processes. By this point, everything was already under control. He didn't show any urgency, because he knew justice was now working in his favor. Exactly 29 days after the hearing, Vanessa loaded her last bags into the car. She took little more than clothes and personal belongings, all that remained after the ruling. The house was empty, cold, with no trace of her presence. Each room seemed to remind her that this was a battle lost long before it began. Without goodbyes, without looking back, she left the keys on the living room table, as the judge had ordered. She left the house that, for so long, she had believed symbolized her success. Now, it was just another painful memory, an open wound that would likely never heal. Adam, on the same night, returned home. He crossed the threshold with the calmness of someone who knew everything there had always been his and always would be. He walked through the now empty rooms, and the feeling wasn't one of victory but of liberation. The house, the beach house, the countryside house, and his company, everything remained intact, exactly as he had planned years earlier when he decided to protect his assets. But he still had one last card to play, and he didn't intend to keep it hidden. The next morning, with the same tranquility he had maintained throughout the process, Adam gathered all the evidence of the affair again. He separated the photos, the conversations, and the documents. He prepared 2 envelopes, addressed carefully. In the first, he wrote the name of the Human Resources Department of the company where Marcus worked, detailing everything that had occurred. In the second, he wrote the name of Marcus's wife, without hesitation. He sealed each envelope, placed them side by side on the table, and for a brief moment, stared at both with the same serene expression of someone who already knew the outcome. There was something symbolic about the scene, as if he were concluding the final chapter of a very long book. Without delay, he sent the envelopes, dispatching them to their respective recipients. Hours later, the impact began to spread. Marcus's company received the material and, faced with the gravity of the content, launched an internal investigation. The case didn't stay behind closed doors. Co-workers soon found out, and Marcus, who until then believed himself above consequences, saw his reputation ruined overnight. But the most painful fall came when his wife, upon receiving the second envelope, discovered the entire truth. Marcus's marriage, like Vanessa's, fell apart just as quickly. He lost his job, lost his wife, and, along with that, lost everything he had tried to keep hidden. Meanwhile, Adam continued his life with the same unshakable calmness. No words, no announcements, no public celebrations. He simply moved forward, with the peace of someone who managed to turn the page without carrying any weight. Vanessa, on the other hand, watched everything from afar, witnessing Marcus's destruction while trying to pick up the pieces of her own life. With each new piece of news, she felt the sting of regret, knowing that all this chaos began with her choices and that now all that remained was to live with the shame and remorse. Adam, in silence, remained the owner of everything, the house, the peace, his own story. And, most importantly, the owner of the truth that had always been on his side, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.